Resonated tonight? What were the moments that struck you? Anything that stood out? You just flick it up.
It's on? Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, where to start? I guess, somewhere in the middle, I thought of Muriel Rukeyser, the poet, saying, "If one woman told the truth, the world would burst open." And I thought this extraordinary to have Eve, so brave, so beautiful, so willing to go everywhere to tell the truth. And what a relief. And yeah, it just, for me, I imagine for all of us, it was such an invitation. Speak of the resonance, that there's a resonance. Eve is creating a huge resonance for the truth. And, that's a place we can start from there and imagine where we could go. So that's
Great. Well, this was the fourth time that I saw it. And after I saw it for the first time, I went the night after that and the night after that. Because it's astounding. And I deal with how people survive trauma. And at the beginning, there's just sensations. There's just your body that speaks and that has sensations and makes you feel terrible. And I think Eve was incredibly articulate about the time before she had language for internal experience and all the things she did to somehow cope, and that's usually how it goes in some way or another. And then her finding words for the unspeakable. And I think that's what it's all about in a way, is to dare to own what happens inside of yourself. And I think that's given to very few of us, actually. Her capacity to put language to the most unspeakable, unbearable feelings, and to stand here with a full body of joy and anticipation and connection is just amazing and an inspiration to us all. And that we need to find our truth and speak our truth. And then also the other thing that is very profound is the opening line of when a kid lies against its mother's body, that body has a home and feels connected. And it's the last sentence also. And how the bodies that get cast away and used and victimized are lonely, bereft bodies that need to find a home. And I think the description of all the connections that get made along the way and the openness that people have for each other on very core, visceral levels is just astounding. And I think there's a dimension that indeed is missing in much of therapy and psychology. But that physical connection with each other is the way to survive, and she beautifully articulates that.
That's wonderful. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, this being your fourth time seeing the play, if anything has changed about your experience of taking in Eve's story each time over the course of this.
It's like watching Othello, first time you have to stop it every few seconds. Can you say that again? Can we have a little pause? So I had to see it 4 times before, and every time, okay, there were some changes, which is interesting to see. And then I was anticipating certain things, and and that voice of the therapist who was able to reframe, very important to reframe. This is about a part of you that's fighting the perpetration and what's being done to your body, and fight. And I love the activity of, and the whole conflict that she is in the play of sometimes having to surrender, and how horrendous it is to surrender, but also that surrender is a necessary part of healing somehow, or coming to a new frame of reference, but also taking action, doing things, connecting with people, saying, no, I don't want to talk to a guy who doesn't look at my face. I'm going to go all the way to Minnesota to find somebody who actually will see me and know what I mean to vaginas. That sort of stuff. So taking action, and I think the taking action that Eve shows us in this play is very much the taking action that all victims of trauma need to somehow be inspired and supported to engage in. You cannot passively lie back and say, make me better.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can go back to the line you were talking about, a mother's body against a child's body makes a place, and in particular in relation to your work on the ethics of care and the relationship between mothers and daughters. And I was wondering if you, in watching the play, see any links there, and how, Eve's relationships with her mother and with her sister.
Well, I think I want to say first, I thought this was one of the most generous performances. I mean, just the sheer generosity of Eve, of taking, really, I mean, I think we really, I feel this immense gratitude to her for doing this. The other thing I want to say is I thought parts of it were so funny. I mean, particularly at the beginning. I mean, her critique of what's going on in the world. And, also her insistence that, yes, this is about her experience of having cancer. That's something we don't talk about, and so forth. But also what's happening to the body of the world, what's actually happening, and we don't know that either, and insisting that the two are connected and going back and forth and back and forth. So, Eve spoke very honestly about her complicated. I mean, whose relationships really, when the end of it aren't complicated, but hers may be more complicated, with her sister and her mother, and where they came to, where they went, and also where they didn't go. I mean, it was not the relentless honesty through the whole thing, the personal honesty, the political honesty. But I think the connection with my work, in terms of, I mean, the most striking connection to me was the surprise. The biggest surprise of my work really were the voices of girls in the years before adolescence, before girls were told, don't say that, or how you're supposed to talk about mothers and daughters as opposed to what you really have experienced. I mean, including how much it means to have somebody hold you the way she did at the end and say, you are here. I mean, to welcome you. It's the same thing as the doctor seeing you, or, so, I mean, that was all through it. I mean, that sense of in us, somewhere in each of us, is the girl, is the boy, the person who says what they see and knows what they know from their experience and actually says it. That was the huge generosity, I thought, of this performance.
And in terms of your work in post-traumatic stress and as it relates to theater, I've been reading a lot about the link of theater as, how we deal with post-traumatic stress. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the act of Eve as a performer, right. Performing the play every night and reliving her cancer and how that links to trauma.
I don't know how the hell she does it. It's to go this deep over and over again, this level of intensity is astounding. But this play really, for me, also illustrates her Eve's incredible flexibility, because oftentimes when people get traumatized, they develop an identity of, I'm a victim of war, I'm a concentration camp victim, I'm a cancer victim, and they get fixed in their role. And I think theater is one great way of taking on other roles and saying, oh, this is what my body feels like when I play Ophelia, or when I play Richard III, and suddenly I become, ooh. And so working with people's bodies and taking on voices and roles that are other than your customary voices and roles is terribly important. But also thinking about another piece of research that I'm involved in right now is that the use of psychedelic agents for trauma, in that you get so fixed in a particular reality. And I think Eve really showed how she gets very much trapped in one reality, and how the hell she gets out of that beats me, but she gets out of it and gets another reality. And I think that's very important for all of us in the world in general, but particularly when you're traumatized, is to really get to see the light and other possibilities and other options. Say, oh, I've come to construct my world in this particular ways, but there's other ways of constructing the world. And so if there's naturally what sometimes we need to do much more in a much more pushy way with people to really see that there's other ways of moving through the world, engaging with the world, etc., etc. And she really embodied that for us tonight.
You know, she said every day she called the City of Joy.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, even in the worst of it.
Yeah, and you know, and I think the comparison with the Congo is indeed apt, because you know when you do this work, and Eve portrays it so beautifully, you are confronted with both the evil, and she's very good in spelling out the evil, like, but also with the astounding life force that we carry inside of ourselves, and that's what you see in places like City of Joy. Even that under the most horrendous circumstances, somehow life comes back and people create new possibilities, and it's astounding. Yeah.
I'd love to open it up for questions, and if you can just speak loudly, I will repeat your question on the mic just so that we can make sure we hear it before they answer. Yes?
Do you think that doing this performance night after night, which is her truth, is part of her cure for herself also? It's like a gift to us, but also to her in a way, because she's able to say it and say it maybe a little differently, but she's able to sort of like be here and be with it and be that force that is driving this crap right out of her and giving us the impetus to drive it out of ourselves.
The question was if Eve doing the performance every night is part of her cure as well.
Well, certainly being seen and being known is what gives life its vitality. That I know, and that's a theme throughout, a doctor who looks at her. And so I think she may be doing the same thing like that with us. It's like, look at what I went through, and the more we show her how we resonate with that, the more we get caught up in our common humanity. I think that's true.
I mean, I could say it's part of an act of taking care of the world on her part. I mean, because she's taking her experience, and I mean, she's bringing her experience to all of us into the world so that we can all, I think, be more truthful and take care of, like she did, herself, one another, and the world. And that's what I think she's... So is that healing? It sounds to me, yeah, profoundly, I think. But it's also very generous on her part.
But she also talks about the generosity of her friends to her and of her sister to her. So it's not, we are in this together. It's an exchange, it's a mirroring that gives life its vitality.
I liked her image of arriving at the infusion center with her whole posse.
Right.
And sort of shaking up that place.
Yes.
I'd like to know from you, what is Eve's personal experience actually doing it every night? Are there some days that are harder for her to do the show? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, there's so many contours of the show because it goes in and out of experiences that are difficult and experiences that are incredibly profound and beautiful, as they've been saying. So I think, you know, we did a run of the show almost 2 years ago now at the American Repertory Theatre in Cambridge. And so she did 4 weeks of it there, and we're in our second week of previews here. But she goes until March, and so it's quite heroic that she's doing 7 shows a week of this. And you know, it's one show at a time, but she's a rock star, and as you can see.
Is there anyone from the City of Joy who's seen the performance?
Yes, Mama C, who she mentions many times in the play. She came in Cambridge, and she's coming here Valentine's Day weekend. So she'll be here, and she's doing 4 talkbacks. And you know, so many women in the City of Joy have know of the performance and have been so supportive. We like Skyped with them in rehearsals, and so yeah.
I am lucky enough to not have way to help people if they're going through horrible things? Because I know there's a million ways to do it wrong, because I hear a lot about those. But what's the way to do it right?
The question was, what's the best way to help people who are going through terrible trauma?
In 10 words or
I thought that Eve told us. She said, first of all, to look at them.
Yeah.
And then I think that she said, I mean, in effect, to listen to them. In other words, to be with them. And I think that's when you learn, not from some, what you can do to be helpful to them. I don't think you can know it before you bring yourself into relationship with them in that way.
I just wanted to add that this is one of my dearest friends, and I had a stroke 9 years ago, and the first night of my stroke, Sharon came in, and she said, wow, we're going to get through this. And she brought me Thanksgiving dinner, and she visited me, and it meant so much, so never underestimate the littlest gesture. She brought her dog, and it was just, the little things mean a lot when you're recovering. So, thank you, Sharon, for doing that for me, too.
I think the issue of the unconditionality is important. The issue of unconditionality is important, and also interesting in the play, the fine balance between distraction and denial. How that she watches movies with people. One of the pieces of the play that every time blows my mind away is her relationship to the tree. And she deeply gets into the tree, and I think it's amazing, something has changed there. So she could focus on new things. And I think helping each other to both tell the truth, but also to help people to say, let's see what else we can look at, not as denial, but to celebrate life together, is an important part of this thing. Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question about how this show came to be at this moment at MTC. How did it get to be this season and this spot?
I believe that when we were doing the show, sorry, the question was how the show came to be here at MTC in this moment. So it was about 2 years ago that we were doing the show at ART, and I believe, I don't know the exact story to be quite honest, but I believe Lynn Meadow came to see the show at ART, and the conversation started from there, and then it was put into the season. But I think part of what I believe your question is getting at is that it's amazing that the show is sort of coinciding with a time period where it feels like it's needed, and Eve's voice is very needed. I mean, her voice is always needed, but particularly in the last year. And we've had so many conversations about that in rehearsal, particularly in that, things not to think about on day 4 of chemo section, like the world has changed since the last time we did the show. And so accordingly, the show has morphed in certain ways to sort of speak to the present moment. Maybe 1 or 2 more questions? Yes.
I was just curious, what brought her to the Congo? What, this woman who went through so much, who endured so much pain, how did she find the heart to do what she did? What drew her there?
I can speak to that on a practical level, but perhaps you can speak to it on a deeper level. Eve was invited by Dr. Denis Mukwege, who's a Congolese gynecologist who was working there, and he reached out to her and he invited her. And, of course, Eve is a woman who's been to so many war zones and so many places to witness so much destruction. But I think the Congo and the women of the Congo spoke to her in a very specific way because of all the sexual violence and other issues in that realm.
I don't know this, but you answered the specific thing, but I mean, Eve's response to her own experience of violence against women was really to devote herself to V-Day, to take the resources she got from vagina monologues. I mean, remember at the time she did vagina monologues, you couldn't put the word vagina on a Broadway marquee. I mean, you couldn't even say it in public. And then she was going to do that to found V-Day, which is an organization devoted to stopping violence against women and girls. And I don't know what Bessel would say, but to me, what better way to heal from your own sort of, or to take your own experience of knowing what violence does to people, than to take it out into the world and say, I'm going to do everything I can to, to stop this. And I think it's the most wonderful organization. Who could not want to do this? I
But what really blows me away is that indeed a lot of people, very rightly, use their own their own traumatization to do well with the world, but then sometimes they lose track of themselves. And what's so amazing to me is that as she is doing that, she deeply pays attention to the creature inside of herself and also liberates herself and not only other people. And she doesn't only project
from the other people.
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure in some way that played into the look into herself of this performance. I mean, because, in some ways you realize it's not just me. It's not just I think the sense of being all alone with it is one of the things that trauma does. Is it makes you feel, just you're all alone and isolated from the human world, and then to suddenly realize, no, in fact, this is joining you.
We're all in the same boat in some way or other.
Yeah.
One more question. Yes.
I see a number of men in the audience, and I wonder if they will recommend to their friends if they only see this. It will be very different from most of everything else they see.
The question was if the men in the audience would recommend this to their friends. We're getting some thumbs up, but do you want to speak to that?
I'm just reminded of the opening quote of Judy Herman's book that some of you may be familiar with, as a quote from Salman Rushdie, who said something like, I went to study men at war, and the more I studied it, the more I came across the women and the children. And the more I delved into it, I found that the story was about women and children behind the war, and it's all the same thing. When I was very involved in dealing with pedophile priest scandals in the Catholic Church, the men who I worked with were very much like the women who had been victimized. It's very similar. In our society, we like to put the soldiers over there and the incest victims over there, but they're the same people. We're all in the same boat, and I think everybody should see this play. And I'm not secret about that at all with my male friends. My masculinity is taken care of, in other words.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for being with us today, and thank you all for staying.